Going live there. All right, I have a few more logging on. Welcome Matt Singleton. Matt is my pastor of my home church, my parents' pastor down in Kennedy, Texas. And Josh Hayes from First Baptist, Jack Bodenhammer from Truett, a few others getting on. It's always good to see. Well, let's, and then Facebook, let's see, is live. And Julie Covington, our assistant director, is helping us monitor all the Facebook chatter. So, all right, well, we're good to go. I'm going to press record and we'll get moving. All right. Well, welcome everyone to this week's first Truett Church Network, Truett Seminary, Baylor University webinar. We have with us today Dr. John Crowder, Senior Pastor at First Baptist West, with us. John, we're glad you're with us.
Thanks. I've been looking forward to it, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about these things. It's an important conversation for us to have.
It is, and I think many of us are feeling that turn to just kind of getting through the crisis, to imagining what is next and what recovery looks like. And there's so many unknowns to that. Till we have some timelines, there are still some important things to discuss. And so we're glad you're with us to help share from your experience. John, how long have you been the pastor at West?
Been here 25 years, so that turned out to be a good long time, but it's been a good ride. A lot of good people here.
Just getting started then, just getting rolling.
Yeah. It does feel like that sometimes. It really does. Like we're just getting started. I always want to encourage folks to stay long enough to really connect with the community, and I don't think that happens until after year 7 or 8. And most guys are moving on to the next church before they really get going good. It's
that's right.
To be said for a long tenure.
Well, that's excellent, man. That's encouraging, and you'll share more about your story here in a minute, so I won't give away the ending. So the question we've been asking everybody here is, A, how you're doing, how's your family, and then is there a hack or a practice that is helping you get through this time?
Yeah, well, thanks. We're doing really well. We, like everybody else, we've got a little cabin fever from time to time, but my family's doing fine. And I guess one of the ways that one of the things that's kind of helped me, I don't know if it's cool enough to call it a hack, but one of the things that has helped me is to separate work and home. Since I have to work at home, I have one place that is work. And when I'm in that place, I'm at work. And then, if I go into the living room or the kitchen or whatever, then I'm at home. And I try to leave work in the work corner and be at home with my wife when I'm in the living room or the kitchen or whatever. Laptops make that a little bit tough because we take our laptop to the family area and we still work, and that kind of cheats them out of some family time. So if we can kind of separating those two. David Cozart, executive pastor at Meadowbrook in Robinson, he set up a card table out in the garage, and I think he called it his garoffice or something like that. Has set up a little office out there so that he could have work separate from family. I think that's important.
Yeah, we're trying at Team Homeyer. I can't see it now, but my son, there's a bed next to me. He has set up a pillow fort on the bed that he calls his office, that he gets things done. So he was pretty angry that I had to kick him out of his office for me to do my actual work. But we're trying.
That's good. I think that's good thinking.
Well, again, our conversation is on recovery from disaster today. For those that are watching on Facebook or on Zoom, we will have time for questions later. So as questions come up, or you have them now, you're welcome to put those in the chat feature, and near the end, we'll get to those and discuss some of those together. But John, just to kind of lay the foundation, tell us some about just what happened at West for those who don't either. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of crises since then, and it's so easy to forget these huge things that shake our whole world for a time period, and then we kind of move on to the next one. Can you give us kind of the brief version of that overview, how it affected the community and your church?
Yeah, you bet. We're talking about April 17, 2013. So we just went through our 7th year anniversary. And on that Wednesday night of the 17th, the local fertilizer plant exploded. And when I say exploded, it was the ammonium nitrate that was stored there. And if you remember the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, that explosion was 1/12 of the amount of ammonium nitrate that exploded in West. So we're 12 times the amount of ammonium nitrate, and the explosion was so massive that people felt it all over Central and North Texas. It registered on the Richter scale. There was some debris found 2 miles away, and that's not damage, but that's actual pieces of the plant that landed 2 miles away.
Wow.
So we lost 12 first responders. It started as a fire, and unfortunately, all of that stuff was being stored in wooden bins, which is unfortunately still legal in Texas, although that needs to change. That's a discussion for another day, I guess. But because it was wood, it was flammable, and therefore it caught fire. The fire department shows up to start putting out the fire. Some paramedics who were in training close by run over to help with the fire. And while they're fighting the fire, it explodes, and we lost 12 first responders in an instant. That night, we also lost 3 residents who 2 who lived in the apartment complex right across the railroad tracks, and that apartment complex was completely destroyed. And 1 who lived in the nursing home, who died of a heart attack because of all the chaos that night. The nursing home was across the railroad tracks and then across the street. So it was, think of it in terms of about a block from the plant. And they started getting patients out of the nursing home when the fire started, because they were concerned about the potential of toxic gases coming over, or maybe even a fire spreading, something like that. So they started evacuating the nursing home early. Then the explosion happened, and most of the patients were still in the nursing home. So we had people from all over who were dragging people out of the nursing home, taking them to the football field. And the football field is where we were doing triage. And then they started telling us there was a very good potential for a second explosion. There were still explosive materials close by. So we had to move all of those people from the football field to the south end of town to the community center. So you can imagine a little town like mine, we were using church buses and pickup trucks and everything except a wheelbarrow. We had them in anything that had wheels on them. We were moving patients about a mile down the road. And so that was a terrible experience for the whole community. We set up triage down at the community center, and that night we had almost as many first responders show up in our little town as we did the total population of our town. At that time, the population was officially 2,800, and we had somewhere around 2,200 first responders come from all over the state to help us get through.
I don't know if you know this, Jack Bodenhammer, who's here with us and our assistant director of ministry connections, was the pastor at First Elmont during that time, and a volunteer fireman. And I think he was among the first, and spent the whole day there, but among the first to respond after the explosion. And so y'all should swap stories and experiences sometime, but worth mentioning.
It is worth mentioning, and I'd love to have a conversation, Jack. I didn't know that you were here, or I'd forgotten it in all the chaos. But one of the things that we'll never be able to do, I've tried to figure out a way, but we didn't keep accurate records. There's no way for us to go back and thank all of those first responders. There's no way to figure out who they were, or we would have. We are forever grateful to those guys that showed up that night.
So your home was destroyed, right? Many in your church. So you're left pastoring both a congregation and a community that's been, just foundationally shaken. What were some of your again, this isn't just about West, this is about this current pandemic and what we can learn. What were some of your key takeaways that you've taken from that just pretty unthinkable disaster?
You know, the thing about, there's an irony about learning about disasters, and that is that learning about these things really is not that interesting until you need it. And when you need it, you don't have time to learn it. And so every disaster, the community has to relearn these things. And we're rebuilding the wheel, or, reinventing the wheel every time the next community goes through these things. And so what I'd love to do is be able to express some of the things we learned to other folks and hope that they never have to use those lessons. But I guess one of the big things that we learned is there's an important difference in the phases of recovery. You rarely hear about that in the media, and so you don't really, it's very difficult to connect to the process. But the process is important. It affects how the victims understand what's happening. It affects what the leaders need to be doing. It affects how and when donors need to give. You have to understand the three phases to be able to manage the process, adequately. So I guess that'd be my biggest takeaway, is the three phases. You have first the rescue phase, and rescue is immediate. That lasts usually hours, maybe days in the case of hurricanes that kind of hang on for a while. Rescue is hours to days. And then you have the short-term relief phase. We think of relief in terms of weeks, maybe months, and then the recovery phase, which is months, but probably years, just depending on the disaster. So every disaster is different, but I think those phases happen after every one.
And John wrote a great article for the Baptist Standard outlining some of this that Jack and Julie will share in the comments, that have some of this in form. We're going in a little more depth. So this, I don't know, I'm hesitant to say this isn't an acute crisis. It is an acute crisis, but it's not like an explosion, that the event is very clear. How much of those phases, for like an acute crisis, like a hurricane or flood or explosion, and then something like a disease pandemic, how much is there overlap there, and how does that change?
Yeah, I think that's a key to understanding what's happening here. We need to see this as a disaster, even though it is very different than most disasters in at least two ways. There are many ways, but the two big ways is, one, we don't see property damage. And so it's going to be hard for us to map our recovery, because if there's no property damage, then you don't get to see the new school being built, the church being repaired, houses being replaced, that kind of thing. The other major difference is that disasters usually begin with a catastrophic event. In this case, the event is just continuing to slowly unfold before us. And so the three phases do begin to overlap, and they get stretched out funny. And so in that way, this is not a normal disaster, if you can, that almost sounds strange to call a disaster normal, doesn't it? But this does not look like the other disasters. But for us to handle it correctly, I think we need to see it as a disaster. So we're still in rescue mode as we're trying to make sure that the people in the hospital have what they need to help those who are, the worst off. We're trying to make sure that we're protecting each other. That's rescue mode. But at the same time, we've also moved into the relief, the short-term relief mode, in that we're providing food for people. We're helping people who don't have jobs. We've got the PPP kind of loan thing happening. This is short-term relief, where short-term relief is, the goal of that is to provide food, shelter, and clothing, just to survive, just to get through. And while all that's happening, we're preparing for recovery. And I don't think people yet see how difficult that recovery is going to be. In the article, you have the link there to the article. You'll see a chart that's used in disaster recovery circles. And in that chart, you have the catastrophic event.
I'm going to share that right now. I have it saved.
Oh, great.
I'll share the screen as you talk through it.
Awesome. That'd be fantastic. And Matt, I told you that I get a little bit passionate about this stuff, so you rein me in and manage the time well. Don't let me don't let me go too long, too hard. But in any disaster, you have the catastrophic event, and the reaction, the emotional reaction of the community is what we're talking about. The emotional reaction of the community drops dramatically as a result of that catastrophic event. In the chart that you're seeing now, they use the term impact. And I would scoot that word over a little bit, because I think after it happens, the emotions still fall even lower. But then after the event, you move into kind of an increase in the emotional response as people start to benefit from the relief that they're getting, and they start seeing all these heroes show up, and the heroes take care of folks, and there are heroes from within the community who step up, and that makes everybody feel so much better, and the emotions actually go higher than they were before the disaster. Because it's like, look at us, we're West strong, or you remember Boston strong, and we're resilient, and we've got this. And there's this kind of a time of emotional stability and even excitement to a degree. So it's there that you're moving from rescue through relief, and then inevitably, the response to that is going to be this huge pendulum swing. It's going to go back the other way. And while you've been excited and you've been happy because all these great things are happening, eventually all the relief stuff gets done. The media moves on to the next disaster. There aren't new things happening and new people showing up, and you're not getting the encouragement that you were. And the pendulum swings to the other side: disillusionment, frustration, anger. And we are just now beginning to see that in our current situation. It's just beginning. It's going to get a whole lot worse. And as spiritual leaders, we need to be ready for that, because you have to go through that part before people are willing and able to work together again to get back up through the recovery phase. And you'll notice the recovery time on your graph, it says trigger events. The recovery through the trigger events all the way through to reconstruction. You'll notice that is a whole lot longer than the first two major, the major drop and the major rise. Those happen quickly. And then the fall is fast and hard, and recovery is very, very long. I think if people had that picture of what to expect as we go forward, it would help them in adjusting, and it would help leaders guide through that process.
And there's links to these in the article that were shared. I'm gonna stop share now. Still learning how to do some of that, so I think it worked. I hope it worked.
Look at from here.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Were there some, you and Matt Snowden rather led something similar to this a couple years ago for Dr. Ron Cook and the Center for Ministry Effectiveness. Did y'all share kind of some, were there kind of a general rule of thumb for however long the disaster lasts, how long some of these other phases might last?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. In disaster relief circles, there is what's called the rule of 10. And again, every disaster is different. And so when you talk about disasters, we all have to remember we're talking in generalities. Especially in this current situation, it's going to be very hard to apply the rule of 10 in a way that we can recognize. But the general concept is still valid, and that is this, that if the first phase, that is rescue, you look at how long it took to get through the rescue phase, you multiply that by 10, and that's how many days you can expect to get through the short-term relief phase. Now, how many days are in that short-term relief phase, you can multiply by 10 and expect that to be how long it takes to get through recovery. So in our experience, the catastrophic event was immediate. So our disaster was even a little bit unique in that it wasn't a tornado that developed over hours, and it wasn't a hurricane that lasted for days. It was an immediate, instantaneous event. But rescue took a little while if we include the time that the part of town was cordoned off and we couldn't get home, we couldn't get to our stuff. People were intentionally homeless for a matter of days. So when I look at the rule of 10, I include that time in rescue. And if I do that, then I give 3 days to rescue. And that meant we were in relief for 30 days, which was just about right. After 30 days, we finally could turn off the panic, and we knew that we were going to survive, and we knew that we had the resources necessary to move forward. And then we looked at least a year of recovery. And if you look at actual reconstruction, it took many more than just that 1 year. It took us more like 5. But the rule of 10 works pretty well. So you can lay the phases, the 3 phases on top of that graph and stretch them out according to that rule of 10 and get a feel for what you might expect in a disaster.
Well, and this is just, well, John, it's an example of great pastoring on your part. I mean, to be thrust into something and not only do a great job that you've been duly recognized for in the crisis, but then to try to work hard on the other end of it to really understand as many of the factors and to work as well through it. And now we're all reaping the benefits of it, which is, really, it's something we can all aspire to in this time. We may not be doing the best work sometimes right now. We're all struggling with that fear, but we can at least do the best we can to learn. And what it is a gift of, I think our people are really resilient, and it's the fear of the unknown in our congregations and our families, which is perhaps the biggest thing. This gives us language to say, hey, here's what we can expect. Here are some things that have happened before, and this is going to be a long-term thing, and we don't know. And that's not failure on our part. That's just the normal cycle of this. And this is really, really helpful. If anyone has any questions in the comments, you're welcome to publish some of those. And so what I hear you saying, John, is this isn't quite like what a typical event disaster. And so that some of these stages may morph into one another and overlap some, but some of the general rules still seem applicable.
Exactly. And so this is, there's never a cookie cutter approach to any disaster, but particularly in this case, it is so different that you're right. It's all kind of morphing together. However, I do think that the themes and the emphases that we want to use in a normal disaster still apply here. And for example, in a normal disaster, during that short-term relief phase, the spiritual leader wants to ensure his people of God's providence. God's got this. He can get us through. For us, we used a phrase that God is bigger than all of this during that time. He's got this. We're going to be okay. Then as you move into recovery phase, the theme changes to one of hope. And for us, that was God is good and West is blessed. He's working. We're going to be okay. We have great hope. And that is really why I wrote the article, because we need to be working on those two themes are kind of overlapping still. God's providence and hope. They're kind of overlapping, but we need to be in those things. What we do not need to do is use the term that we hear the reporters and even local commercials use the term new normal to describe what we're experiencing right now. I personally think that's dangerous because we're on the downward, we're in that decline on the chart. We're going through bad times. We need to say to our people, this is bad. Don't settle here. This is not normal. Save new normal for a way to give people hope that one of these days we're going to be reestablished. Things will be different, but we'll be reestablished one of these days. So use new normal as a future hope, not what we're going through right now. So yeah, all of that stuff's morphing together, but the themes I think still work, and we need to keep those in mind.
Boy, that's a good word, a preaching word on new normal, and the correct definition of that, of new normal's not right now. That's what's to come. What we're going through. That's helpful. I've discovered in teaching some of our pastoral classes that African American pastoral theology, particularly, is so helpful in saying everything that happens to us, the role of the pastor is to locate that under the umbrella of God's movement in our lives. So good, bad, everything. And I think we all knew this. It just gave me that. Some of the theologians there gave me good language for this. And this is yet another one of those things. We locate what is going on under the umbrella of what God is doing in the world. And that gives us a framework to deal with this.
Yeah. One of the things that got me through my darkest days was Jim Dennison's comment. I hesitate to call it a quote because I might not get it exactly right, but the essence of what he said at that moment that got me through was that which God allows, he also redeems. And man, I love that. And we can tell our folks that this stinks. We got to be honest and transparent. This is bad, but I'm going through this bad with you. And we're following a God who can redeem the worst of life and bring beauty from ashes. And I've seen it happen. And you've seen it happen in other experiences as well. So you share that with your folks. And one of these days, folks, we're going to see some beautiful stuff come out of this.
And we are seeing, I know y'all saw it in West, but we're seeing it now. People coming together, people helping. The people of God are active and on the move in powerful ways, and that's happening. But continuing to name that and encourage and help prevent fatigue and care for them as that line continues, when we do face the disillusionment, being able to prepare for that is so helpful. Well, John, thank you for your time. Go ahead.
Well, I don't want to belabor the point, but I do want to just point out, when you have time to look at that graph, you'll notice that when it's all said and done, on the other end, the emotional response of the community is actually a little bit higher than it was even before the thing happened. And that's where that's a good example of hope. When people say we're going to be stronger and better on the other side, they're actually telling the truth. It really does wind up better.
Well, it's a pretty good Christian witness that we go through the valley, don't we? That's how we get to the other side, is through the valley, and not getting stuck in it, not avoiding it, but through it. John, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I know everyone that has appreciated it. Would you have a final word of encouragement or blessing for those watching or that'll be watching this later?
I would just say to you that the people you lead are looking for transparency and trust. They need to know they can trust you, and they need to see you go through this with them. So I'm praying for God's blessing on each person who participates and watches in this. And specifically, I'm praying that you'd be strong and courageous.
All right. Well, thank you, John. We appreciate your witness to us. We appreciate your heart for encouraging pastors, which is shown in many ways and for sharing a bit of your experience to help us. Well, thank you. And we'll be back tomorrow with Dr. Steve Reed at 2 o'clock, discussing disease and hope in the Old Testament and what that witnesses to us today. So thanks again, John. Thanks everyone at home. We'll see you soon.
Or thanks for the opportunity, Matt. God bless you, buddy.